The air tasted of ash, thick with silence so unnatural it made every breath feel like betrayal. Cities once pulsing with life were now skeletons of steel and stone, draped in smoke, haunted by flickers of memory. Streets had turned to graveyards. Glass towers crumbled like sandcastles in a rising tide. The sky no longer changed, perpetually bruised purple and gray, as if the sun itself had given up watching. Elias stood ankle-deep in broken concrete, clutching the satchel tighter against his chest. His fingers were raw, nails chipped, but he didn't loosen his grip. Inside were the last transmission codes from the Arcadia network, a ghost satellite system that might still be drifting somewhere above the ruined Earth. His breath came shallow, fogging the cracked lenses of his mask. They couldn't afford another failure. Not today. Behind him, Mara crouched beside a scorched vehicle husk, scanning the street with a rifle slung across her back. Her hair, shaved close on one side, fluttered in the wind like a ragged flag. She'd been quiet since they'd lost them the night before, snatched in the black smoke near Sector D. No screams, just a sudden, stomach-knotting absence. "We move in 2 minutes," Mara said without turning. Elia nodded. "Arcadia relays just beyond the wall. If it's intact, we can—" "If it's intact," she cut in, "we can beg for help from ghosts." Their eyes met. She wasn't mocking him. Not really. Just tired. They all were. Tired of trying to outthink something that didn't eat, didn't sleep, and didn't feel mercy. The pulse had begun 372 days ago. No one really knew what it was, only that it came not from the stars, but from below. Deep below. Buried for eons, awakened by the greed of drilling corporations or the arrogance of deep-sea excavations. The stories differed, but the result was the same. Humanity was caught unprepared. At first, it was just electromagnetic interference. Satellites blinked out. GPS faltered. Then came the storms, unnatural, patternless, electric tempests that burned through communication lines and sent entire cities into blackout. And then the pulse spread. It wasn't a creature, not in the traditional sense. It had no single form, no shape. It appeared as waves of darkness, tendrils of heatless fire, and sometimes as voices from long-dead loved ones. It turned humans against one another. It broke the mind before it destroyed the body. And as the great nations scrambled to understand it, they made their final mistake. They tried to weaponize it. The resistance, if one could call it that, was a mosaic of scattered survivors, fractured military cells, rogue scientists, and those simply too stubborn to die. Elia and Mara had been part of Echo 9, a recon team operating out of northern ruins. Their job had been to retrieve lost tech, data cores, drive fragments, neural archives. Anything that might explain what the pulse was. Anything that could help them fight back. But now, even Echo 9 was gone. Mara whispered. She was pointing up. The spire loomed like a broken needle, piercing the sky. Half of it had collapsed during the third blackout, but the upper deck might still be powered. Solar backups, maybe. That was all they needed. One last chance to send a signal. They moved quickly, quietly. A sprint between cover. Down an alley littered with shattered screens, still flickering static. The wind howled between buildings like a warning. Inside the spire, they climbed. 15 flights of narrow stairs, each step creaking under the strain of their bodies and memories. On the 12th floor, Elias stumbled and caught himself against a wall where a child's drawing remained, faded but visible. A family holding hands under a blue sun. He stared at it for too long. "You can't freeze now," Mara said softly. "We're already ghosts if this doesn't work." They reached the relay chamber, a circular room surrounded by half-shattered panels and blinking, rust-stained consoles. The smell of ozone was heavy here. Elia moved to the terminal, fingers dancing across broken keys and scorched glass. Power was low, but he could reroute it. He had to. Mara stood guard at the door, rifle raised. Every creak below sent adrenaline stabbing through their spines. 5 minutes, Elia murmured. "I can get it open. Arcadia's still up. Orbit's decaying, but it's responding." "What are you sending?" "Everything. Coordinates. Survivor clusters, psychological patterns. Weaknesses in the pulse's frequency fields." If anyone's out there, anyone, they'll hear us. He hit execute. The console glowed blue, then white. A deep hum filled the room, a pulse of their own. They waited. Nothing. Then a flicker, a voice. This is Arcadia Prime. Message received. Elijah felt his knees weaken. He looked to Mara, who was blinking fast, as if unsure whether to believe. The voice continued, crackling with static. Acknowledged. Relay transmission acquired. Prepare for planetary directive upload. Immediate intervention in process. Maintain position. Mara lowered her rifle slightly. They heard us. Someone did. Then the wall behind them groaned. It wasn't the wind. A shimmer passed through the floor, like a ripple in a mirror. Then another. The pulse had followed the signal. Mara spun, rifle raised. Get behind me. Elijah backed toward the console. We can't lose the relay. The walls buckled. The air grew cold. And then it came, a shape wrong in every direction, oozing forward with a kind of dreadful elegance. It whispered in Lynn's voice. Elijah, help me. He squeezed his eyes shut. That's not her. That's not her. Mara fired, light cracking through the darkness. The thing recoiled but reformed, tendrils snaking forward. The console beeped. Upload complete. Arcadia has your signal, the voice said again, clearer now. Reinforcements en route. Stand by. With a scream, Elijah grabbed a flare from his belt and ignited it, throwing the searing flame toward the creature. It screeched, static and screams merged as it evaporated into the air. Silence returned. They stood there, breathing hard, blinking in disbelief. Then Elijah said, barely above a whisper, we called. Mara looked at the broken relay, now glowing like a heartbeat, and someone heard. Outside, far above the dead cities, a sliver of light cut through clouds. Something was descending, not divine, not alien, human. The arsenal had not been lost, only waiting. And somewhere deep within them both, a flicker of hope began to burn. They weren't alone anymore. They came from the edges first, figures streaking across the upper atmosphere, like falling stars. Not machines, not soldiers, but something in between. Designed for war, reprogrammed for survival. They landed in zones marked dead and forgotten. And in their wake, life stirred. Elijah and Mara watched from a fractured roof of the relay spire as the first of the vessels descended, angular and obsidian, humming with an energy that vibrated through the concrete. They didn't speak, not in any language they recognized, but every move they made resonated with purpose. These weren't saviors from the stars. They were the last fragment of Earth's ingenuity, forgotten tools from old wars, buried projects resurrected by the Arcadia protocols. A response, not a rescue. Within hours, the perimeter around the relay tower was sealed. A dome of refracted light shimmered into place, deflecting the invisible tendrils of the pulse that writhed like smoke beyond it. Inside, an uneasy calm. Outside, oblivion. The leader among the newcomers was a tall, silver-veined construct with a human face mapped over its chassis. Its voice was masculine, neutral, filtered through layers of synthetic modulation. Designation, Echo Relic. Directive, assist and fortify. Resistance classified as priority unit. Mara folded her arms, unblinking. You're late. Intervention protocols required activation from ground-level confirmation. You provided the signal. Yeah, well, let's hope that was worth Lynn's life. The relic didn't respond. Maybe it wasn't designed to. Or maybe it understood the value of silence. Elias stepped forward. You said we're a priority unit. Why? There are other survivors, other cells. There were. The relic paused. You possess neural encoding from field specialist Lynn. Arcadia decrypted her transmissions. She was mapping the pulse's subharmonic language. A weapon, partially completed. You carry the remaining code. Elias' breath caught. He hadn't even known Lynn was working on a weapon. All he'd seen was her obsessive note-keeping, the whispered monologues during downtime, the sketches of sound wave patterns on torn paper. Now, those fragments were their most valuable asset. We'll need access to an archive core, Mara said. There's one in Sector 18 under the university ruins. Access compromised. Pulse concentrations exceed survivable thresholds. So we punch through, she snapped. The relic tilted its head. We will assist. You lead. They left at first light. 3 relics, Elia and Mara, across miles of collapsed infrastructure and corrupted terrain. The road to Sector 18 was a graveyard of past attempts. Armored transports overturned. Rusted drones half buried in soil that pulsed unnaturally. The pulse had changed the very earth. Buildings wept condensation like open wounds, and the air was laced with static that tasted like metal. As they neared the sector perimeter, the pulse presence became visible again, threads of black shimmer, curling through air like breath in winter. The relics emitted low-frequency pulses, repelling the tendrils, but not entirely. Twice they had to stop. Once to drag Mara back from a shadow that had mimicked Elia's voice. Once to sever the arm of a relic that had begun to mutate mid-step. They're learning, Mara said under her breath, adapting faster, which means we're close to something they want. The university lay half-submerged in the cracked earth. Its great glass atrium collapsed inward like a broken lung. Beneath it, the archive vaults, sealed during the second wave, before the pulse had fully emerged. The team breached the vault doors using plasma welders scavenged from the relics. Inside, the air was dry and oddly sterile. The pulse had never touched this place. Rows of server stacks blinked faintly, running on ancient backup systems. Lynn's files had been encoded in fragments, requiring biometric confirmation to unlock. Elia placed his hand on the console. A soft chime. Authorization accepted. Welcome back, Specialist Lynn. Her voice emerged from the speakers, soft but unwavering. If you're hearing this, I'm gone. Or worse. But the weapon, the one I built in silence, because I knew they'd never authorize it, it works. It's not fire or bullets. It's resonance, pattern disruption. Think of it like singing the right note to shatter glass. Only the glass is the pulse's hive consciousness. The files unfolded in front of them. Spectral maps, frequency models, waveform disruptors. The pieces of a weapon, unlike anything built before, and all of it encrypted behind a series of puzzles that only someone close to Lynn would understand. Can you unlock it? Mara asked. Elia nodded slowly. I think I have to. They spent the night there, in the belly of old knowledge. While the relic stood guard, unmoving, Elia parsed through Lynn's work. Her mind had always worked sideways, metaphorically, musically. He remembered how she'd used songs to teach encryption theory, how she hummed to herself while working. One file was locked with phrase, "What do the stars sound like? The day we fell?" He typed like hope-breaking. The file opened. Bit by bit, the weapon took shape. It wasn't a single device. It was a sequence, a code embedded in a sound wave, broadcast at precise intervals, over high-frequency transmitters, a virus for a consciousness made of frequencies. As dawn approached, Elia connected the fragments and looked up. I can finish it, but we need a clean broadcast tower. The ones here are too degraded. Mara exhaled sharply. There's one, Blackridge Station, still intact, last I heard, but it's deep inside zone red. The pulse hive. Exactly. The relic turned its head. Transmission from Arcadia. Confirmed patterns of pulse withdrawal from red zone periphery. You may have initiated dissonance. Mara raised an eyebrow. Or they're pulling back to regroup. Either way, it's now or never. They left the archive at sunrise, armed not with bombs or bullets, but with code and resolve. The journey to Blackridge would not be quiet, and the pulse would not yield. But for the first time, they weren't running. They were delivering a message, a note that might shatter the silence. A song Lynn had started and Elia would finish. And the pulse, for all its power, had never learned to listen. Blackridge Station rose from the scarred horizon like the ribcage of a dead god, jagged and leaning, but somehow still intact. Its broadcast tower pierced the clouds, its peak shrouded in the murk of upper atmospheric interference. The structure had survived 3 continental quakes, 2 directed strikes from pulse, and a half-dozen sabotage attempts during the final corporate wars. It was a relic, a stubborn monument to communication in an age that had forgotten how to speak. Elias stood in its shadow, staring up at the tower through the haze of drifting ash. Beside him, Mara tightened the strap on her rifle, her eyes scanning the horizon. Behind them, two of the relics advanced with mechanical grace, heads tilting as they synced with the tower's outdated proximity systems. The third relic hadn't made it, lost the night before to a sudden surge of pulse activity that had turned the sky above them into liquid shadow. It hadn't screamed. It had simply stopped moving. "They know why we're here," Mara said. "They've always known," Eli replied, adjusting the control unit strapped to his forearm. "We just finally given them something to fear." Mara gave him a look, half respect, half warning. She'd grown used to the danger, but not to the idea of hope. That was harder to carry. Hope made you hesitate. Hope made you human. Inside the station, dust drifted through cracked beams of light. Machinery slept beneath tarps of grime and rust, humming faintly, as if remembering a purpose. The relay room was 10 floors up, shielded behind blast doors and biometric locks that flickered open under the relic's guidance. Elia approached the main terminal. It powered on with a groan, the screen pulsing like a tired eye. He connected the resonance core, the weapon Lin had built in silence, and he had completed in desperation. The waveform pattern was loaded, fine-tuned to match the pulse's deepest frequencies. A song composed not of beauty, but precision, every note a scalpel. "Once this goes live," he said, "we won't get a second chance." "We won't need one," Mara said flatly, and then after a pause, "We better not." They didn't have to wait long. The pulse arrived before the first transmission. It didn't come with fire or thunder. It came with a breath. The air grew thin, sound flattened. The walls moaned as if the building itself recoiled. Shadows detached from the corners and began to move. Whispering voices slipped into the room. Familiar voices. Mara stiffened. "Don't listen." They said her name in Lin's voice, then in her mother's, then in a tone that was just barely her own, twisted into accusation. Elia activated the transmitter. A low hum filled the room, the first tone of the resonance weapon vibrating through the station's bones. The shadows hesitated. They pulsed with uncertainty. One of the relics stepped forward and engaged its shield. The pulse responded instantly, lashing out with a tendril of darkness that struck the machine mid-torso. The relic buckled but did not fall. Instead, it surged forward, embedding itself in the growing void. Sacrifice as strategy. Elia turned up the frequency. The tone rose, weaving into itself, harmonic and alien. The pulse began to convulse. Shadows flickered like dying embers. The whispering turned into static. "It's working," he said, voice barely audible over the mounting sound. Then the ceiling cracked. From it descended a form not yet seen, a nexus entity, larger than any pulse expression encountered before. It had no face, no fixed outline, just a roiling mass of memory and dread, shifting and reforming, thousands of eyes that blinked and vanished, mouths that screamed in forgotten dialects. Mara fired. The bullets passed through, but something reacted. The entity reeled not from the attack, but from the broadcast. It screamed, a sound without vibration, without direction, pressing into their skulls like ice. The terminal sparked. "Power drain," Elia said, scrambling to redirect. "It's trying to short the transmission." The remaining relic moved to the core and initiated a manual override, plugging directly into the power conduits. Lights exploded across the station, and the resonance grew sharper, louder. The entity shrieked again. Its form was deteriorating, no longer elegant, but erratic. Pieces of it detached and evaporated. What had once been one became many, chaotic and panicked. Elia closed his eyes and began the final sequence. "Lin, guide this home," he whispered. The waveform climaxed. A piercing note erupted from the tower, not through speakers, but through the very air. A resonance so precise, it bypassed eardrums and struck the nervous system directly. All around the tower, the pulse fractured. It didn't vanish. It shattered, like stained glass thrown into a hurricane. The Nexus entity split apart, pieces unraveling midair, each one twitching as it dissolved. Then silence. A silence that wasn't oppressive, but pure. Mara lowered her rifle. The terminal powered down. Outside, the clouds had cleared, not entirely, but just enough to see the outline of the sun, weak but undeniable. They stood together in the quiet. The last relic fell still, smoke rising from its back. It had given everything. Elijah exhaled, his whole body trembling. "We did it." Mara said nothing. She stared out the shattered window at the horizon, where the pulse had begun to recede like a tide finally pulling back. But she didn't smile. She didn't relax. "El," she said quietly, "look at the sky." He did. Dozens of streaks burned across it, more ships, descending fast. Too fast. No markings. Arcadia hadn't responded again. The transmission had gone out into space, and something had heard it, something that wasn't the pulse. The streaks grew larger by the second, white-hot trails arcing through the upper atmosphere. Elias squinted against a flare of light, watching the newcomers descend without hesitation, without formation, like bullets, not messengers. He knew instinctively these were not Arcadian reinforcements. They were not human, not relics of forgotten Earth war. Whatever they were, they had answered the call Lynn's weapon had sent, a cry designed to shatter the pulse. But it had reached further than they imagined. Mara took a step back from the shattered window. They're not slowing down. No parachutes. No atmospheric brakes. Elias's voice was tight. They don't need them. The first of the vessels, sleek and glistening like obsidian bone, pierced the ground outside the station with a soundless impact. The earth buckled, but there was no explosion, no shock wave. The sky above seemed to still in their presence. 6 more followed, embedding themselves in a wide arc around the tower. Nothing emerged. No doors opened. The silence deepened, as if waiting. Mara clicked the safety off her rifle. This is not a welcome party. Elias's mind raced. Lynn's resonance weapon had been designed to destroy the pulse by disrupting its harmonic consciousness, a frequency-based virus. But what if that same transmission had been read not as an attack, but as an invitation, a reply? One of the vessels stirred. Its surface rippled like liquid metal, folding it on itself until it formed a tall figure, roughly human in proportion, but wrong in every detail. It stood motionless, no face, no mouth, no eyes, just an asymmetrical design etched with faint, glowing glyphs. Then another moved, and another. In seconds, 7 of them stood facing the tower, silent sentinels. The lead figure raised a hand, long fingers unfurling in a gesture not quite threatening, not quite peaceful. A wave of pressure followed, dense and immediate, pressing into the station like a second atmosphere. Elias stumbled. "They're broadcasting," he gasped, pressing his hand to his skull. "It's mental, not verbal. Structured thoughts." "Are they speaking?" Mara's voice was sharp, wary. "They're listening." The thoughts came not as words, but as impressions, images, tones, sensations, questions layered in metaphor. "You altered the signal. You struck the pulse." "Why?" Elijah forced himself to think, to respond in kind. He closed his eyes, focusing on the intention behind Lynn's creation. He showed them images of cities swallowed in shadow, of people twisted by the pulse, of resistance crushed beneath invisible waves. Then he let them feel the resonance weapon, its precision, its pain, its purpose. The response was immediate. The figures shifted, subtly, like a ripple over still water. And then the tone of the mental broadcast changed. Not designed, born. Your song was death, but we recognize the melody. It is ours. Elijah reeled. They're not just aliens. They're connected to pulse. Mara's mouth tightened. "You're saying they made it?" "No, I think they lost it." Another image burst into Elijah's thoughts. An ancient world swallowed in the same darkness. Forms like theirs dissolving under a rising tide. The pulse was not their creation. It was their mistake. A parasite born from a failed experiment, set adrift and replicating in the only way it knew how, by consuming minds, erasing individual thought in favor of collective dominance. And Lynn's weapon, by sheer chance or divine instinct, had mirrored the same harmonic disruption they once used to contain it. You have harmed it, but not ended it. It will return. Elias stepped forward, trembling. Then help us finish it. The figures fell still again, deliberating. Moments stretched, taut as wire. Finally, a response pulsed through Elias' mind. We cannot remain. To war again is to awaken it, but we can offer what remains. A choice. A panel open in one of the dark obelisks. Inside, a device pulsed with gentle light. No buttons, no screen. Just a small, smooth sphere resting in a cradle. Mara eyed it warily. What is it? Elia reached in, cradling the sphere. It was warm, alive. He didn't need to ask how it worked. The knowledge settled into his bones as soon as he touched it. It's a seed, he whispered. A cognitive architecture. A way to build a defense, not just a weapon. A new consciousness that can recognize and repel the pulse without turning into it. Are you saying it's alive? Not yet. It needs a host. The meaning behind the figure's words clarified. A choice. The pulse could return. When it did, humanity would either succumb again or evolve. But evolution came at a price. Lynn would have understood. Elias said softly, running his thumb across the sphere's surface. She'd have done it. But she's not here, Mara replied, her voice low. You are. He looked at her then, the weight of years in his eyes. I don't think it's meant for just one of us. She understood. It wants us both. The figures did not nod, did not affirm, but the silence confirmed it. To accept the gift was to become something else. Not pulse, not machine, but a new kind of sentience, part human, part guardian. It would mean surrendering their past, perhaps even their names. But it would also mean no more running, no more hiding. The chance to build a future where no child had to learn to fear their own shadow. Elia turned the sphere between his palms. We called out, and someone answered. Mara closed her eyes. Let's answer back. They stepped into the light together. Behind them, the tower still hummed. Outside, the sky was clearing. And above, among the stars, the pulse stirred once more. But this time, Earth would not face it alone.